is a fourth, is it a fourth or fifth strand of vaccination out? Is it a fourth?
So it's really I would say kind of when we think about the vaccines, so the main categories of vaccines that we have are these mRNA vaccines. So those are the Moderna and the Pfizer shots, and this one's really kind of the second version of that. And so what it is it's a bivalent, whereas the first one was monovalent, and all that means is the big fancy word to say that this is now targeting two different strains. So the first series of vaccines, whether it was your first shot, your second shot, or your booster, was all kind of the same vaccine that was targeting the original strains of COVID. And we know that as the COVID has changed and as it's developed new strains, that the things that we target, they're kind of like these proteins on the surface of the virus, and they're kind of like signals that, hey, I'm COVID, you should come attack me, to our immune system or to the vaccine or whatever. And so what these new vaccines are is we have new signals from the new strains of the virus, and this vaccine is targeting both the old strains and the new strain signals so that we can better protect us against these new strains of virus. And so it's really kind of just the second, I would say, second mRNA vaccine. And it's for anyone who's gotten any of the original doses.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the rumors surrounding COVID and how it works. I think the biggest one for me is that historically, when you got a vaccination, it included a part of what you were being vaccinated from, because that was how we exposed our body to that pollutant safely in order for our body to develop its own immune response. But this type of vaccine that they've created now is a little different.
That's right. That's
Tell
right.
us how that works.
So it's different in a few ways. So I think the what you're explaining is more like one of those live viruses. So there's one of the old polio vaccines, and then our varicella vaccine. Those are live virus vaccines where they give us a softened and safer version of the virus for your body to kind of train against. Whereas we actually have now developed these new technologies that can look at a different part of the virus's, basically its structure or system, that's called its mRNA. And so there's no live virus in these vaccines. They basically just have these components of mRNA that our body can train against and develop antibodies against the spike proteins, these visual things on the outside of the virus, so it can defend itself. And so you're not getting any live virus, nothing that can cause an actual infection. It's really just something for your body to have an immune response to and train itself to.
Which is why, even though you're not getting the virus, because you're teaching your body to immunologically respond to it,
yes,
you still may get a simulation of what is considered a fever, or because your body is going through the motions, but
that's
it's
right.
not really there.
That's right. You're having a similar, like your immune system is responding as if you're having an infection in that time. So that's why kind of you get these reactions with fever, night sweats, that are more short-lived. And because your immune system's building a response, you might have some of the same side effects or complications that you would get with the COVID virus, but at a much, much, much lower rate, and at a much lower degree.
Okay, so you hear that, audience? And by the way, if you want to call and ask questions, please, this is the time, 410-481-1010. That's 410-481-1010. So if you heard that, audience, the virus is not actually located in the vaccine. It's not like the historical ways of vaccination. It's using an entire different method in order to train your body to fight off the virus. Okay, let's go to the next rumor and myth. Let me see. The vaccination is unsafe because they didn't take enough time to actually develop it correctly.
So with this vaccination, what we've seen is they've actually, well, first of all, it's now been out for about 2 years. And so we've seen that the general public, it's been a very safe and well-tolerated vaccine. So we know from that standpoint that it's safe. And then these new bivalent versions are essentially this same vaccine. It's just there's a slightly broader target where they're targeting kind of both vaccines. So it's not a completely new vaccine, this new version. So we know that it'd be safe and effective. And it's been tested for now several months. That's why, we know that Omicron started coming out late last fall, but we're just now seeing the vaccine in response to that. And that's because they wanted to take time and test it prior to bringing it to the market. And so now it's safe and approved for Pfizer for the new vaccine dose for 12 years and up, and for Moderna for 18 years and up.
Okay, so because of the new technology and now we're 2 years in, are we saying that there may not be any long-term effects from the vaccine?
Yeah. And even historically, so mRNA vaccines are something that have been in production since 2000, since the early 2000s when we had that first SARS outbreak of a very similar virus to this one. So that's actually was the instigator for the development of this vaccine technology. So we know that this vaccine technology is safe because it's actually been tested for now decades in response to the SARS initial pandemic back then. So we know from that standpoint that this technology is safe. And even when you look long term, you look at any of the previous iterations of any vaccines, any real side effects or complications are from the immune response right after it. They're not kind of long lasting effects. Whereas when you look at actual viruses, particularly the COVID virus, there can be really severe complications at the time of the illness, as well as really prolonged, protracted syndromes. We're just starting to understand things like long COVID, which can cause fatigue and brain fog for months or even longer for some people. But we're not seeing really anything similar to that in response to the vaccines.
Okay, so that's myth number 3. Myth number 4, the vaccine can cause you to get blood clots.
So they've actually done studies, and they're rated the legs or to the lungs after a COVID vaccine, and they're not seeing any sort of increased risk over the RNA that 2 years. And it's also looking at, we know that when people come in with coronavirus into the hospital, that they're at a much higher risk of blood clots. And so we actually screen them often for clots in the leg or clots in the lung. And if they decompensate quickly,
just so I can reiterate that, because you went out a little bit, you have a higher capacity to get blood clots from the virus than you do the vaccine. And it's one of the things that you are screening for when people come into the hospital with COVID or testing positive for COVID.
Yes.
Why is blood clots? Why are blood clots becoming an issue for people who have gotten the COVID vaccine? I mean, not the vaccine, COVID disease.
It's a very good question. So that the virus is acting at a level of where the blood vessels are and causing inflammation at that level, which can increase the chance of there to be clotting at that level. And then we also know, just because of the issues that system is overactivated, like that increased clotting risk factors. And so when people come in, one of the lab tests we check for something called a D-dimer. In people with severe COVID, we often see that to be elevated to really high levels that we sometimes don't even see in patients we know to have high clotting risk factors, like people with cancer. And so it's a very similar mechanism to that, where it just revs up the immune system, and then that increases the clotting risk factor.
I see. And so it's the body's over response to the invasion of the virus.
That's right.
Which is one of the reasons why, if you can minimize,
as well as the viruses act.
As well as the viruses what? Repeat that.
As well as the virus's impact on the blood as well as the virus's impact on the blood vessels themselves.
Okay, which is why you can minimize that by getting the vaccine. You can reduce those
That's
factors
right.
tremendously, because it's going to reduce the way the
Exactly.
impact that the virus has on your body. All right, so let's go
That's right.
to, this is my favorite one. I don't even know if you can answer this, but when I saw this, I was just like, what? 5G networks can spread the new coronavirus. So if you are on your cell phone, it's going through your cell phone to the person you're talking to. Okay.
Whoever wrote that was pretty creative.
Yeah, okay. Now this one we know is not true. I don't even, drinking bleach or other disinfectants can protect you from COVID-19. Yeah, there's nothing scientifically sound in that at all, except for the fact that if you drink poison, you will die.
Then you probably won't die of COVID. You'll die of all
No,
that
it
bleach
won't
you
be
just took.
COVID. It won't be because
Yeah,
of the poison.
that's right.
Okay, exposure to high temperatures prevents COVID-19.
So no, it won't protect you against COVID-19.
Well, COVID can't survive outside of the body. Pretty
Yeah,
much
so
not at all.
that's why we think that the risk is lower during of transmission has been lower during summer months. It's not because of really a protection from the temperature itself, but more so because the gatherings have been more outdoors than indoors.
Right, right. And just to put it out there, because I say this all the time, our organization, the nonprofit that I'm associated with, Concord Community Development Corporation, we've been doing gatherings outside since October 2020. They are the safest because the virus can't survive in the open air, not for more than what, 2 seconds, or is it 5 seconds, or which is why they say stay 6 feet apart.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if for you to be outside talking to someone, it'd have to be for at least 5. We think at least 5 to 15 minutes directly talking to them to be able to catch it while you're outside.
Okay, wearing masks can cause CO2 poisoning.
So no, there's no increased risk of having too high of carbon dioxide if you have a mask on.
If you breathe it in your own breath.
We can tell you, even when people are athletes and they're performing, and so, when you're performing in a sport at a really high level, you're going to produce more carbon dioxide. You're going to be blowing off more carbon dioxide. And from athletes who've performed with masks on, we don't see any drop in performance with them despite having a mask on. So there's, even in that extreme setting, we don't see any issues with kind of carbon dioxide retention with masks on.
Do you see us going to a situation where athletes, maybe in basketball because they're indoors, are going to start wearing, because we had a lot of outbreaks during the NBA season, going to start wearing masks?
That's right. I think it'll depend if we get another round of variants that maybe have a higher degree of hospitalization rates. Maybe that'll be something we move back to. With the new strain, the Omicron strains that we're seeing now, it's almost a trade-off that the virus has done where they're actually more contagious than some of the original strains, and they're more able to evade our immune system. But the trade-off is that they can certainly cause very severe infections that cause hospitalization, but not to the same rate that the previous ones did. So I think if you have another variant come up like Delta, maybe that's something that we'll see again.
That is myth number 8. The Omicron infection is too mild to be dangerous.
Yeah, so that's definitely not true. We still, I was in the ICU for about 8 weeks during the last peak, and we saw definitely higher hospitalization rates than we had seen since some of the early days in the pandemic, and pretty high mortality rates as well. I think it's something that maybe the average person might not get as severe of an infection from Omicron, but just because of how fast it's spreading, and how fast it can spread, more people overall still had very severe illness. So it's definitely still something to take seriously.
And is this a rumor? Is this true or false? That if you are vaccinated, you can receive, you can still get the virus, but you don't transmit it to someone else.
So I think, everything's in gradations. So just like, so the vaccines offer a protection against COVID. So they offer protection against getting COVID. You're less likely to get COVID if you've been vaccinated and you're up to date on your vaccines. And then the severity of your illness is often less in those situations as well. So you're less likely to spread it, but certainly still able to spread COVID. And so if you're feeling any symptoms at all of a respiratory infection like COVID, should definitely stay home in quarantine until you've tested and know that you're safe to return to society.
And can we go over those symptoms? I had them here. Cough, fever or chills, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing,
Mm-hmm.
muscle or body aches.
That's right.
Sore throat, loss of taste or smell, diarrhea, headache, new fatigue. You may be tired already, but this is even more tired.
That's right.
Nausea or vomiting, congestion or runny nose. One of the things that I kept hearing was this, I kept smelling, it was like burnt toast. It was like, it wasn't burnt toast, it was like burnt metal. I didn't even realize I couldn't smell. I realized it when I was trying to cook for my husband, that I couldn't smell whether or not the food was done. Or because that's one of the, when you cook with all your senses.
That's right. That's right.
And that's one of the things that is easier to tell when the food is ready, because you can smell it. And it wasn't like I couldn't smell it. It didn't have the same effect. I couldn't tell whether or not it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could smell was like burnt, it wasn't burnt toast, it was like burnt metal or a weird, is that a natural response?
Yeah, so it depends on the strain and depends on the person. So especially the earlier strains of COVID, they were quite inflammatory in our airways. So especially around the nose. So we think that's part of why there was this loss of sense of smell and sense of taste. And so part of it is just the dulling of smell can make things smell abnormal, and that can actually linger even long after, for some people, they're done with their COVID infection, just because of that local damage. That's what we think. But some of the new variants don't have that symptom, and some people, even with the old variants, didn't get it. So the lack of that symptom is not a reason to say, okay, I don't have COVID.
Right.
But it's certainly a very, very strong point to that you might be infected with COVID.
I think that, and I do want to put it out there, we should not take this lightly, because your reaction to the virus may not be as great as the person
That's right.
that's sitting beside you. We had a situation with a choir where there was a concert and one of the choir members showed up thinking she had a cold. Even if you think it's just a cold, most medical express centers, you can walk in and take a rapid COVID test. If you're showing symptoms, usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, you're showing symptoms, usually that means that the virus is active, and you're probably going to test positive under a rapid test. Sometimes a rapid test will test negative, and that's usually before the symptoms show up. But if you're showing symptoms, it is just irresponsible to go on to your event and not stop and get a rapid test.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, think about that list that you read to us, how extensive it is. And so I think really any of those symptoms shouldn't be shrugged off and should be taken seriously, because we know that we still have people in our community who are at risk, and it's our duty to protect kind of those around us. So I think, taking that seriously. And the government is still offering free tests. So you can sign up online and they'll deliver them right to your door. They come in packs of, 2 sets of 2, and every few months they send more out. So I think that's always something that if you having trouble accessing tests, that's always an easy and free way to do it.
How can they find the tests that the government is sending out?
So if they just Google, government supplied COVID tests, it should be the first one that comes up. Testing resources from COVID.gov.
Okay, my assistant is going to look that up, and we'll put it in on our Facebook stream. We'll put it in the comments for anybody who wants to have that link. Yep. So one more question, and then we're gonna take a break for station identification. Our last rumor before the top of the hour. Okay, wait a minute. Okay. You can get COVID-19. Okay, we are right. We already said that. Wait a minute. I've already had COVID-19, so I don't need to be vaccinated.
Yeah, so we're seeing, we talked a little bit about the extensive amount of symptoms you can get during the COVID infection. But we also know that the effect of COVID can be longstanding. It can cause things like, issues with immune regulation long-term. It can cause things like brain fog, fatigue. And we don't even really know fully what sorts of long-term health effects we can have from it. I think that's something that we'll continue to learn about as the years go on. And so even if you've already been infected with COVID, getting a vaccine and then a booster after that, it would offer you more protection from having a severe infection, and then hopefully, prevent some of those more long-term health outcomes.
All right, so we're going to take a station identification break. We will be back. If you have questions, you can call us at 410-481-1010. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm going to ask about the altering your DNA one.
WOLB Baltimore and WERQ-FM HD3 Baltimore, celebrating Radio 1's 42nd anniversary.
Our Radio 1 family, our employees, their family members, our listeners, our viewers, our extended family.
And serving the African American community for over 42 years.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Hello, DMV. This is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru. I am a farmer's agent located at 11707 Ricestown Road in Ricestown, Maryland. Here, you can call me at 443-660-7131 or listen to my show every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. on WOLB. If you don't know what to do, we can help you because we've seen a thing or two. See you soon.
It was 2 a.m. when the fire alarm woke me and my husband. Next thing I know, I was standing in my front yard watching my home grow to flames. That's when a friend of mine introduced me to the Masters Construction.
No one desires the tragedy of a house fire. But should this happen to you, we hope that you will choose the Masters Construction. Call us at 443-250-5048 or visit us at www.themasters-construction.com.
At every step, he took the time to explain what was next. Call the Masters today, 443-250-5048.
All right, you ready to go back live?
Yes.
You're live in 3, 2, 1, whenever you're ready.
Hello, DMV.
Hello.
This is Ramona Jones McClain, and we are back. And today we are talking about the COVID-19 virus and disparaging all of the rumors around it. If you have questions, you can give us a call at 410-481-1010. So let's get to some more rumors. Here's one. The COVID-19 vaccine can alter your DNA.
So I think this is actually a good one to talk about,
Okay.
because it's, you know, part of where all these rumors come from is just both misinformation and misunderstanding of kind of the foundation of all of this. So number one, these are mRNA vaccines. So the way that biology works is that we have DNA that's within the nucleus of our cells and all of our cells. That DNA produces this messenger RNA, which is kind of the guide for which our body produces proteins. And those proteins do everything from build structures in our body and then also defend against diseases. And so we're introducing an mRNA vaccine. So it does not go in the nucleus of our cells, does not get introduced into our DNA. It only is a guide for which our body can produce proteins. Whereas viruses are actually well known to enter our nucleus and to affect our DNA. And so I think it gets to kind of one of the core things that I see with a lot of the misinformation is the misinformation that's being spread about the vaccines themselves is actually really true about the viruses and a legitimate concern about them. And so I think this is another reason why the viruses are not something that we should take lightly, and another reason why the vaccines are much safer.
Absolutely. Also a reason why everyone in your household should be vaccinated, including the children. Because one of the other rumors is that kids cannot get the COVID-19 virus. Yeah. And I think it's gone through my family twice, and both times it came from my 7-year-old granddaughter. Because she's the one out there. Kids are the one touching, you know, when the cold virus runs rampant, it's because kids are at school passing it from one to another, because kids just touch. They are just like a sponge of germs and stuff. You agree? Yes.
Yeah. They've been, really been a part of this pandemic since the start, and we need to protect them, and in protecting them, it can also protect the rest of us as well.
Yes. Okay, here's another myth. Vitamin C supplements will stop you from catching the COVID-19 virus.
No. Yeah, they don't offer any protection against the COVID virus, unfortunately. You're welcome to take them regardless, though. They're still safe to take. They just haven't been shown to really help much with that.
Okay. Here's one. The COVID-19 virus is less deadly than the flu.
So we're certainly have not seen that. When you look at both the mortality rates and then also the rate of spread, those are really the two reasons why we've seen so many more deaths from the coronavirus than we've seen from the flu.
Wow.
And that's because it's spread much faster. When one person gets COVID, they might spread it to 5 people, whereas if someone gets the flu, they might only spread it to 2, and then that kind of builds and builds and builds. And then we do see a much more severe disease with COVID, especially in older folks or people who are overweight, and so they're particularly at risk. And so that's why we've seen such high mortality.
Why is that? Why is obesity such a large factor?
So, early on, we thought it might be in relation to all the other medical things that come with obesity. So things like, high blood pressure, diabetes. But we're actually seeing that even when you control for those other risk factors, that it's just disproportionately affects people of much higher weight. So that's something we're still trying to figure out. But we know that to be true. And it reminds me, my time in the ICU, I've seen several people where they were in their 30s and the only medical risk factor they had was their weight. And a lot of them ended up passing away. So again, it's something that if you're in that population, you should really consider taking the extra steps to protect yourself and getting this new booster.
There's another myth that says if you had the COVID-19 virus, that you would know. Even though it shares common symptoms with pneumonia and the common cold, you would still know without testing.
Yeah, and that's been a big source of confusion, is that it's hard to tell what's COVID and what's not COVID. And so that's why still testing, and maybe if you're able, if you have the benefit of being able to work from home or carry out what you need to carry out without leaving the house, it's something that you should do if you're feeling kind of any sort of illness symptoms, especially during these times.
I experienced that myself, where I was having major issues. I have lupus, and I've had it for a long time, and I manage it pretty well. One of the biggest things for me is I stay away from other people. Like, I've been social distancing for years now because I'm just susceptible. And one of my triggers is my allergies, and people wear perfume, colognes, to stuff. Okay, but I went to the hospital, I don't know, earlier this year, and I kept telling the doctor that something was wrong, that I was having a response to something, and it felt like I was in an active lupus episode. And they kept insisting I had COVID. They tested me twice, and come to find out it was shingles. And I ended up diagnosing it myself, calling my doctor over the phone and saying, hey, this is what's going on. I think I have shingles. And we did a video chat like this. I showed her, and I didn't even realize it till after I left the hospital. I didn't take any of the medication they gave me. And the rash eventually broke out on my back. Now, mind you, I had been sick for a while, and I couldn't tell the difference between my lupus symptoms and the shingles because it was the same pain. The only difference is the lupus pain was intermittent, and my shingles pain would not go away. That's when I figured something was wrong.
Yeah. We could do its own show about shingles, because yeah, and that you're right, the pain comes before the rash often, and that can make it difficult to identify.
Right.
And the pain can be long-standing even when the rash goes away.
Yeah, but you know what? I couldn't. Unfortunately, in my life, I lived through so much pain all the time, and it was just like when it started. Okay, it was just like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing today. I'm gonna get up and keep moving. And when I came back home, it wasn't gone. And then the next day, and then the next day, and then by the fourth day, I'm thinking, okay, something's not right. I should not. What have I done to expose myself to send me into an active lupus episode where it is just constant and not going away? But I had already done a rapid test that I had at home before I even went to test myself to see if I was positive, because at that point I was 3 days in, and I figured I should test myself, and it came up negative. But when you're using the rapid test, you have to be conscious of the fact that it can give you a false negative.
That's right.
If you take it too soon, or if you don't repeat the test the day after. And I think that's important to talk about, because as non-medical people, we've been and absolutely necessary, because we've been asked to isolate, we've been asked to distance. Doctors' offices can be just a hotbed of anything that you want to catch at any time. And so we've been forced to go do preliminary work before we even go to the doctor. But I think it's important to understand the tool you have and how it works.
That's right, definitely. And ultimately, if you're still concerned and you've tested negative, that's why we have PCR tests, because they're more accurate and they can pick up on those false negative patients that aren't picked up on a rapid test.
Yes, and there is nothing wrong with taking cold medicine immediately if you feel like something is going on. It's not going to interfere with anything with
That's
regard
correct.
to whether or not you have it, but it can provide some immediate relief
Mhm.
and eliminate some of those severe symptoms. One of the things because me and my husband were exposed to it that very first month, that February of 2020. One of the things they talked about then was not sleeping laying down, was to sleep. And unfortunately, we were doing that already. And they also talked about getting outside to get fresh air. That kind of helped with respiratorily wise, with making sure that the virus didn't, what do you call it when it settles in you, metastasize or get down into your lungs, and drinking liquids constantly to flush it into your stomach and area, because the virus can't survive in your stomach.
I think that, the other thing is right now we do have treatments.
Yes.
So over the course of our experience with COVID, we've developed both treatments for in the hospital as well as, now Paxlovid, a treatment for outside of the hospital. And I think it's particularly if you're someone who's either at risk, if you're in that high risk elderly population, or maybe you have some other risk factors like other medical conditions or obesity, or if you are someone who's had maybe more prolonged symptoms after prior COVID, it would make sense for you to let your doctor know if you're feeling symptoms of COVID and maybe test positive on a rapid test. So that way you can pick up a prescription for Paxlovid, which we think might both, taper the course, maybe prevent some of those long COVID symptoms, as well as decrease the chance of your hospitalization.
Okay, and what is the treatment called?
It's called Paxlovid is the brand name. So
okay.
Mhm.
And so give us a little bit more information, because I know that there are some limitations about when you can get it. How does it work?
So I think at this point, as supplies of this medication have come, they've become much more viable for people. I would just, if you think you have COVID and you're concerned, I would just let your doctor know, or let your local pharmacist know, and they can release a prescription to you, and let us worry about kind of trying to triage, who might be a benefit to getting it. Because we do see that it does help. It helps with symptom relief. It helps with tapering the course of the infection, and it might help prevent the kind of long brain fog or symptoms. And it's just an oral pill. It's a pill that you can take. That's an antiviral medication, and it's available for anyone who's having those symptoms outside of the hospital.
Okay.
But it has to be within 5 days of symptom onset. That's the only thing that concretely needs to be true.
Okay. And why is that?
When they do the studies to look at its effectiveness, that's the time point where the benefit of taking it kind of was lost. And so it really helps prevent a long course or a severe course if you take it within those first 5 days. But after 5 days, it's just maybe not quite as effective. Maybe the virus has already taken its course with your immune system.
Now, is it 5 days from the first
symptom onset
of symptoms? Okay.
That's right. That's
okay.
Right.
All right. So I've got another myth here. It says drinking alcohol and eating garlic can protect you from COVID-19, maybe vampires, but not not COVID-19. There's also another one here. This is just stupid. It's not safe to receive a package from China.
That is safe. I'm sure most of our packages are still coming from China. So.
Yes, I'm sure.
The virus can't, and at this point, our spread here is higher than the spread there. So.
Okay. Now, you told us about the new vaccine that is Omicron specific.
That's right.
And that is something that it was recently developed and is available now. And
That's
that
right.
would be what we consider all of those who've gotten all of them, our fourth booster.
Yes. So it actually, anyone who's gotten anyone who's gotten initial COVID series. So if you've gotten your first 2 doses of either Pfizer or Moderna, or if you've gotten a J&J. So if you've gotten any of the baseline vaccine series, this is the booster that you're eligible for. And right now, anyone, it doesn't matter how many boosters you've gotten in the past or what doses you've gotten so far, as long as you haven't gotten any of them in the last 2 months, then you're eligible for this if you're over 18 or if you're over 12. And something that we talked about earlier is that there's really no preference between the Pfizer or the Moderna, regardless of what you got from your initial dose. Right now, the recommendation from the CDC is to get whatever available in your area. So most pharmacies probably will only carry one of the 2, and that's just fine, whatever you're able to get.
How important is it for someone who is pregnant or breastfeeding to get the vaccination?
So I would say very important. We actually know that there's a degree of immunity that you can pass on in a positive way to help protect your baby in those situations. And we know it's safe in those situations as well. Of course, talk to your doctor beforehand, talk to your OB-GYN doctor about it, but it's something that you can do to protect your child and yourself. And, some of the scariest cases that we see of COVID are when people come into the hospital and they're pregnant, and we're trying to balance, taking care of the baby and taking care of the mother in that situation. It can be really challenging.
If there was one thing you had to leave the community when it comes to COVID and the vaccinations, what would that be, Dr. Stewart?
If you're having concerns, like any of the things we're talking about, just talk about them. Don't keep them to yourself, because that's how they kind of spread and cause problems. So, no question's a dumb question. We're happy to talk about anything, and no one's at fault for whatever beliefs they have. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're all prone to it.
All right. I want to thank you so much for coming on today. You have given us so much information. This is Dr. David Stewart. He is a resident at the neurology department at Johns Hopkins University. He was my husband's doctor, and I appreciate him coming on. We may do this again. I hope we can reach out to you, especially as new variants show up and new rumors show up. And many people have concerns, especially those employers that may be mandating vaccinations in their environment. I think that when it comes to science, it's still always going to be some level of unknowns. But the best thing you can do is to take the most educated guess.
That's right.
And with the most information that you have. And there is a lot of information and a lot of people in our community that can be resources in answering the questions and concerns that you have. And don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Stewart, and we will talk next time.
Yeah.
All
care.
right. So, as we wrap up today's show on COVID-19, we know that in the beginning of this pandemic, there were large disparaging numbers between ethnicity and those who were dying and contracting the virus. It used to be the largest group were African Americans. Now in 2022, it is Latinos and Hispanics. Why is that? Lack of resources, lack of knowledge, lack of information. It is important that we share with our brown sisters and brothers the necessity of being safe. The opportunities are available. It also could be the lack of medical resources or the ability to go to the doctor. You can be vaccinated with minimal cost, and you can get health insurance that will cover, I believe, up to 8 tests a month, which is what I was reported through our health insurance portal. Your medical insurance will cover up to 8 rapid tests a month, whether it is directly or reimbursement. My thing is, we are entering into October, and a week or so we'll be entering into open enrollment. I say continuously, there is no reason why you should not have medical insurance in the state of Maryland. Now, whether your medical insurance is good medical insurance or not, we're going to explore that. Next week, we're going to talk about open enrollment. No, week after next. Okay, next week we're going to do Medicare. We're going to talk about what is available and what you should be doing and how and when you should be doing it. With my husband on Medicare, he turned 65 last December. It has been challenging and in understanding what is necessary and what is important for Medicare and what is necessary. And it is extremely important, just plug it up, that you know how to navigate this system and how to get to the resources that you need to get to. It does not matter what nationality or ethnicity you are, nor does it matter where you live. There are resources and opportunities available to you to get medical insurance, to get affordable health care, which is what is available through Maryland Healthcare Connection, and for you to get affordable Medicare coverage, whether it is through an Advantage program or through a Medicare supplement program. We're going to answer all of those questions for you over the next 2 weeks and provide you with the empowerment in order to effectively represent and protect yourself. And talk about more on how coverage is changing and the challenges as we move forward with regards to cost and availability. One of the ways that COVID-19 affected the insurance industry, it facilitated a lot of different consolidations of insurance companies. You used to have hundreds of products out on the market, and now a lot of them have joined forces, not whether it's health insurance or life insurance, but also property and casualty companies have come together, brokerages have come together just to survive the economic impact as a result of the pandemic because of the lower resources. The cost of claims have gone up. With the morgues and the funeral homes being overwhelmed, the cost of burials has gone up because it's only a certain number of funeral homes available that can do certain types of funeral processes. But in all of that, you need to make sure you are properly insured and you have the resources, honestly, to put you at the front of the line. If your life insurance is intact and the funeral home is going to want to take care of you immediately because they know they're going to get paid. If your medical insurance is intact and you have the coverage that you need for situations where there is a stroke or rehab is needed. If you took the time in your 40s and 50s to purchase a long-term care policy, when something happens and you need to go into a long-term care situation, it provides you opportunities that would not be available if you do not have the lack of resource, if you have the lack of resources. It's really simple in preparing yourself for your future. We are all going to get sick. We are all going to age. We are all going to pass away. The question is, are you going to be ready to protect you, your financial situation, and your family to make sure that everything you need is going to be there? There are so many individuals, when we're talking about COVID, that refused to get vaccinated, that did not get vaccinated, and it impacted them when they got sick. Many people ended up in ICU in serious condition and became financially handicapped because they couldn't work, because they lost all kind of financial resources, being unable to produce income. I was talking to a gentleman the other day that talked about how he had been married for 12 years and he got sick in 2021, really sick. He worked for himself as a contractor. And when he got sick, his work became minimalized to the point of almost nothing. His employees that were working for him were having difficulty sustaining the company, and he lost a lot of the revenue. As a result of being in intensive care, his wife left him. He lost his house, and he ended up having to take care of his children on his own. These stories are not unique. It has happened to quite a few people as a result. There are things that you can put in place to safeguard your financial situation, such as disability, critical illness, which is what they call cancer policy sometimes, long-term care insurance. It may seem like an unnecessary cost, but if something goes wrong, it is very necessary. But listen, I'll be willing to talk to you and provide some rates to you. You can call my office at 443-660-7131. This is Health Insurance Month. We are going to talk about health insurance, whether it's Medicare, open enrollment, or long-term care. We are going to talk about all of that. And we're going to talk about how to winterize your garden. That's going to be the last show of the month, or one of the ones at the very end. We talked about earlier this year how springtime is coming and what you should be doing in your garden. We're going to be talking about how to winterize your garden. Why is your garden important? Aesthetically, it increases the value of your home and provides you a good resources for being healthy and getting outside and doing something that puts you in a better position. This is Ramona Jones McClain. I am your insurance guru, and we are here to talk about all things insurance. You can call me at 443-660-7131. We will talk next week.